Hello, I am here with my friend Ed, and we are about to have a discussion about his roots and his journey to the modern. So, Ed, how do you identify yourself?
Well, today I am known as the Pagan, historically, but my name is Ed Hubbard, and I'm very proud of my name because it has a lot of history behind it, and not all of it's the great history that people would like, but it is a historic
So,
name.
what is that history?
Well, we've got a lot of things. We've got Elbert Hubbard, the Roy Crofter Society. We've got the ties right into it, but really it comes out of the idea of being some of the early Baptists. Some of our families came out from the founders of New England, and we were Samuel Hubbard started the first Baptist church of Rhode Island. So we've always been involved with it, and so we've always been involved kind of with the United States. And as slavers, as traders of the North, we were on both sides of that fence, and so there's a lot of people who've done a lot of dynamic things. William G. Hubbard was the one who started National Geographic. So we have this idea of a name being important. But in my case, I was from a branch of the family, as my dad was, that was country. And he lost his farm. Well, my grandfather lost the farm on his death because the family dissolved. He did the greatest thing that the Royal Society does and changed their life, and it was that they did educate their children. They made sure most of their children were educated, and a lot of them with college degrees. So that's kind of where I came out of it. What I think is important for people to realize that most people don't realize that I came out of a supremacist background, Southern Dominionist. I've been talking about it for years, but I don't think people understand where that started with me. But yeah, my father was a Klansman of high order, and my grandfather was a wizard.
So, Dominionism as in Christian Dominionism?
Well, yes, Christian Dominionism, the 7 pillars, the 7 mountains philosophy.
Can you describe that for us?
So the 7 mountains say that you have to understand, in white supremacy, it is not Judaism. People keep saying, it's like being a Jew, that somehow they were chosen by God. No. This is not that sort of thing. That's a very different, separate thing. And oftentimes, where the anti-Semitic stuff comes from is this idea of who's chosen. Oh no, these are radical theories by a number of people that the white man, which really emerged out of America, not Europe, especially this idea of the WASP, the idea of this very white sort of culture, Caucasian culture, emerged out of the United States in response to holding power against people of color. That was essentially it. And all through that process, you can see historically, up until my family, is that the white settler, who has his roots in the Pilgrims, who were extremists, their roots into the early people who came here to be extreme and to try to, live their world, to survive, did so. Came into the United States. And they were slavers. And that was it. There were a lot of more slavers. They believed in slavery. And that echoed right up into my father. And finally, generationally, we broke it. We were able to break it. But it took a lot of work.
So Dominionism is expressly linked with white supremacy?
No. There's a lot of black churches that are Dominionist.
Okay.
But it does go hand in hand with white supremacy. Mm-hmm. And I don't understand sometimes when minorities follow it, they're trying to gain the same sort of upper hand. Like they tried to talk about in Django the movie. I thought that was very weird. They talked about the fact there were black individuals who owned slaves and also kept control of them. Mm-hmm. So there are Dominionist blacks and Hispanics and others that are out there who believe in the same philosophy. And they do believe in, a lot of them believe in separation of the tribe. That you should, the ultimate thing of the Dominionists is that you should be of your tribe, of your church, of your parish, of your blood. And it's very simple. Dominionism says that we need to own most of the world. It was a lot behind a lot of Baptists, a lot of the religion. The family is a organization that exists in Washington, D.C. that teaches it. They teach all sorts of things. And it's the idea that you need to own the 7 pillars, similar to Rome, the mountains of Rome, of society to be able to do it. The first one, of course, is church. Sure, that's easy. Second is education. We have to control education. They've done that. They started taking over school boards. In the 70s, when they started having these elected school boards, who were the people going in there? Early Dominionists. And then you have to take over healthcare. And that's like the 4th or 5th. But it's out there, healthcare. It's very, very important. You take over healthcare. You isolate who you want. You saw that a lot when they wouldn't allow blacks into hospitals. Or the whole joke on MASH one day about black transfusion of blood from a black man to a white man. And they made a whole huge issue out of that on both sides, both the negative and of course, Hawkeye and Pierce were good guys. They just turned it into a major joke to scare them. But that sort of ideology, and Dominionism means to control your health care. And it means also the same for other groups too, but for particularly in Supremacy that we're seeing right now in D.C. This is the group that's taking over. And then you have to control government. And that's, of course, the big one. They've been doing that. Elect your officials. There is no separation of church and state. This is how the church and state become divided. And then food. It's important to control food. Commerce. Big on commerce. And the 7th and final one is, of course, what they call conceptuality. It's gotten changed to a couple of things, but the idea, who has the right to make the language? Mm-hmm. So their last step is if they've done all of the other things, they get the right to even write the language. And are we not seeing that right now with the LGBT? With all of it, they're rewriting the language around it. They're trying to make it negative language. They're trying to make it so it's impossible to think these concepts. So white supremacy is all about exalting that conqueror identity. They didn't come here. My family didn't come here or see themselves as refugees. They came here as colonists, conquerors. And too many times the people from Europe who transferred over here didn't come here with the idea of escaping something. That's whitewashing. They came here to build empires. They came to build worlds. They came to express themselves. And this idea they came here because they were so bad in England. Hell no, these guys were so bad they were getting fined, they were getting hit. They're like, you're hitting people. You're beating people up. Pilgrims, look them up. They were beating people up. And there we go. And so that came here, and they brought that attitude with them. And, things that proceeded out of it. And it's still here today. I mean, it's right here with us now. And I was, like I said, the kids, I feel sorry for kids that get raised in it. It's very hard not to follow up. I mean, there are things that happen to you that makes it more and more realistic.
So, in talking about that, so what were you taught as a child in a Dominionist, in a white supremacist household?
First, that's a good question. I was first to be a righteous being. The idea to protect your family, your group. Your first step is to be a righteous being. And there's a concept within that you are allowed to do almost anything within the rules. Then you're taught the family rules. Don't date outside the race. Don't talk, to others. Be careful of them. I mean, I was allowed a little bit of some intermingling because we were in a public school. My dad didn't like it. But you've got to do it. So one of the things that happened, we had a lot of them from the South came in, and they were starting to teach us Spanish in 8th grade. This was kind of a new idea. Now, today they do it all the time, but in our neighborhood, which was now being transferred to Puerto Rican, the Puerto Rican refugees came in. There were a lot of Puerto Rican refugees starting to come into this neighborhood, and it was causing real grief. So they wanted to teach Spanish to everybody. But mostly it was meant for the white kids, right? It was meant, you had to absorb it. And my dad, my pastor, Fairfield Baptist Church, Southern Dominions, Mr. Raybach, I have no problem talking about that. Ray Bakke, my dad, Paul Bunyan. Yes, my dad had a friend called Paul Bunyan. The Gomolenskis. I remember it. And all these families went in there and said, we do not want our children learning Spanish. This is America. We speak English. And they said, well, we're teaching in high school. It says, don't care. We do not want you teaching it. And they did not teach it to us. And we actually had our own study hall when they taught Spanish. That's why I had this inability to speak Spanish. I was never able to learn it. I was raised around towards it. But I was taught to avert it. They weren't allowed to talk to us. So that was a real, people don't think about it. So being a righteous being correct in your behavior, don't have things challenge your faith. Faith above everything else. Have faith in God. And that God had given us a special mission. That was always a part of it. To protect ourselves, to lead us into the future, to this sort of idea that God, the conqueror at Revelation, is going to need us to fight the forces. And there came in probably the one thing that kept us there. And that is the idea that if we ever put down our God for even just a moment, if we ever allowed it to happen, they allowed the black population, and they used a lot foul language, we don't need to use that today, but you know what they said, were ever allowed to rise. And also the Hispanic community, and they call all those favorite names too, but especially black community, if they were ever allowed to be armed, to ever, even though they had the right as the First and Second Amendments to do it, because some of them were arming themselves, and the gangs were starting to arm themselves, that it was, that there was dangerous, that we had to wait for mud races, mongrel races, and I hate to use these words, but just to understand what they were saying, ever really get a guard. And our neighborhood started to fill up with these types of communities. Chicago was a black city. We were having a large Hispanic movement, that sort of thing. And it caused a lot of fear amongst them. Those gangs, and they created gangs with the Gaylords, and a lot of white gangs formed to keep them out of the neighborhood. Because we were taught that if they ever came in the neighborhood, they were going to steal all our stuff, first and foremost. If you leave anything out in the yard, they're going to steal it. That if you get caught out alone out there, and there's 2 or 3 of them, you better be able to beat them all. If you get into a fight, if you ever get into a fight, realize they're going to kill you. You better kill them first. Worry about the consequences later. We're white men. We can get out of it. Because and that was a big thing. I was taught from a very young age that if I injured or hurt somebody, I was going to be okay. As long as I did it, how? Remember the words? Righteous. I stood my ground. I was protective. Think about all the behaviors you're seeing that they're claiming, right? It's that they're righteous in their behavior. They've been taught a certain process in limiting their education, and they know that they're right, and they carry a special prayer with them. They have a special value to God. Because they are the Christian warriors who will fight at the end of the age. Helter Skelter. Helter Skelter, you talk about Manson. Same idea. This fear of a race war is what keeps them in more than anything else.
That is unbelievable.
It's true.
But how did you, at what point in life did you transition? Because obviously then you became agitated.
I became, there will be a moment where I dramatically changed. I think one thing, I want to offer one more piece. One thing that dramatically changed me to the negative and frightened me, and it really hurt me for a long time, is I met a young Puerto Rican young lady, and Amanda. They said, well, that's not much of a name. Well, no, that sort of thing. And I thought she was the most cutest, most beautiful thing. And I wrote her a note and said, I want to go out with you. I've never been sure exactly how and I think that her father handed it back to him, that they let him know, no uncertain terms. He let me know that I would not ever date a person of race, color. He used the whole language. I had a 10-minute diatribe right there of what I was not allowed to marry. And that was all at the other end of fists. Kicks. It was the worst beating I ever got in my life at that point. It put me down for 3 days. I could not go out of the house. And my father promised if he ever did that again, that he would kill me. So you talk about honor killings from Muslims. It's in the supremacist community too. There is this idea that you don't do. So I was going into the military, happy Ed, 17 years old. I joined the military, get through my boot camp, get through my A school, get through my second A school because I was colorblind in my first one, and I get my first posting on a ship. I am a yeoman, even second class, about to get my third stripe for class, and I'm working in an office. The old guy on the top, the chief petty officer, is a white guy. A nice one, southern guy. Actually, it was nice, really nice. If you're talking about for a chief petty officer of the Navy running the damn office, as he would call it. He ran both the yeoman and the personnelman. And in there, I was the only other white person. We had 7 workers in there, and the other ones were black. I'm like, okay, fine. I had no problem. I worked for like 2 months. And then they caught me once, and I was really super tired. They fuck with the young guys. They do it, of course. And I was just really super tired. And everything else. And a young man by Grissom, and he was not an office mate. They came and called me, I had to hand out papers and everything else. But Grissom was not in my office. He was a fireman. He worked down in the engines. And he started saying some shit about me. And I said, shut the fuck up. You know what I said? Right? And I didn't know what happened. All of a sudden, I had his fist in my face. And I was down on the ground. I would get 4 stitches in my mouth. And a big bruise. Oh, huge. My lips were cracked. Oh, yeah, he did. There was no holding back. We get back to the ship. And the executive officer said, we told you, Hubbard, as they didn't use anything, Hubbard, we didn't want any trouble from you. We thought you were a prize and joy. You've disappointed me. Deeply disappointed me. Yes, sir. I can't believe you did this. I'm sorry, sir. Oh, I don't want you to be sorry to me. You're sorry to this young man. And I looked at him and I said, I am sorry, Grissom. And he goes, yeah, whatever. And then he looked at him and says, Mr. Grissom, your temper is a little bit much. And we told you that if you ever came across this, that you were supposed to file a report. Why didn't you file a report? Sorry, sir, I don't know. I got angry. So you're wrong, too. Well, we're going to put you guys in the brig for 2 weeks. You go out and work every day, and then you're doing double hard duty together. And then you're going to write us a report for 2 weeks later about why this was wrong. And in that moment, that XO knew everything because Grissom had a lot of hesitation. He hadn't received very good treatment from white men. So there's military was the place where he was an equal. And I learned to understand that. And I understood what would happen. And I got to really build a friendship that would last for years. Just like any military, we're 60 years old now, but it was like we had a great friendship. We'd always make jokes. But we got that opportunity because at XO, instead of trying to throw out 2 troublesome people, he really wanted to repair what he thought were 2 up and rising stars in his ship. And he never let us forget. So how you guys doing? We're doing well. And every couple of weeks, for the first while, he called us to lunch in the office quarters to eat with him. So he took that XO took a very big point of breaking this behavior. In me. Let's be honest, it was in me. I was the culprit. But also in Grissom as well. Because he wanted him to be able to say, this is, that sort of thing. And that really changed the way that I looked at the world. From that point on, I would be that way, and I would keep working at it. I became anti, and then so the other thing I had to face, the last piece you have to face, You got to remember, Jesus is returning. Let me get you down into the dirt. Jesus is going to return. He's going to rapture up our men and our women, our old men, our old women. And some of the old men don't look that old. Our children are going to be raptured up, but unfortunately those children that are not properly baptized will remain behind. You better teach your children well, because if Jesus comes and raptures them, the unbaptized babies, the ones who haven't gone through the full confirmation of the church, will be not sucked up. And if you're a Catholic, well, we don't want to talk about that. We'll be sucked up in rapture. And at that moment, those men of us that be left behind are Jesus' warriors. We are there to make sure that Jesus and his people take over the government's canon. The Bibles hold us all the revelations. We have the 7 seals to break. And once those start to break, well, yeah, we're going to be happy. We're going to have our guns and our food and our land, and we're going to protect it. And when Jesus appears, the great white Jesus appears, we would march off. And we marched off in World War II. Don't doubt, a lot of the men that fought on our side were racist. Remember, people don't realize this is always the way they've been. Look at how we treated men, black men who fought in World War II, and how we treated them when they came home. How about Vietnam? So let's make this no effort. This idea of supremacy in the military, of course we did. We're training. We're training for the ultimate conflict. And they teach this to their children right at the beginning. And everything else is a lie. I found out if you can break that idea of a lie, you do. And so after that, I started, I was already into witchcraft and occult and magic. And I decided that I had one more incident, the Jupiter effect. If anyone remembers the Jupiter effect, me and my boys, we thought this was Armageddon moment. Jupiter effect. When all the planets lined up, and California, which where we were stationed, was going to fall into the ocean. We took our leave, and everybody knew why we were taking our leave. It was like, hey, yeah, California's going to fall into the ocean. And we went out. We went out for 10 days of liberty. On day 1, nothing happened. So delayed 2. Sit out there in there, and then have to come back to work. When everybody knows, everybody knows that you and your little crew of white boys, that's where we're there. We knew we ended the world. And I had a few kooks. It wasn't it wasn't really a supremacist group at that point, but it still had those elements. Still very Christian. And we went out there to the desert thinking that, California was going to be, and we were going to see the beginning of Armageddon. Every Christian group that's properly groomed can be brought to a moment of battle. We've seen it over and over again. Millerites. Everyone can bring it. So you can kill today to bring them to that one moment. And that's what happened January 6th. Remember, this is built into their psychology. And when I got back, oh my God, we were so laughed at. It wasn't just a little laugh. The officers gave them permission. The chaplain gave them permission to laugh at us. They were given permission to ridicule us until the end of the week. Here you guys are. You have the rest of your leave, or you're just out for the leave. And they says, how was your Armageddon vacation? And they just razzed us for 5 days hard. And then that period of time, I realized how toxic it was. If you don't think that we're going to survive, and that in heaven we're going to survive, this other plane of existence we're going to survive, right? You throw away your life. But you only throw away your life under the most dire circumstances, because your job is not to your life. We're outnumbered 20-1. Look at the world. All those Chinese men, when they come over by their barges, they're going to take us out. You have to take out as many of them first. There it is. You must take out as many of them first. And we had some, these were radical ideas, but this is what I was steeped in, And I had to fight it, and it took me a long time. There are times I have to be very careful. I ask my friends, am I being appropriate, or tell me when I'm not. And it's changed over the years, but in general, I work hard at it. I try to create equal opportunities and things of that nature. But I know that this cancer exists, and it exists in our world today. And I teach people how to get past it. Remember, the best way to beat this isn't fighting it head on and trying to tell people that they're wrong. But it is to hold them accountable every time they do something. We see them get away with it all the time in law enforcement, so we can't let them get away from. I mean, it's really tough. I don't have a lot of answers. It's really negative. I just do the best job I can.
I have a question for you concerning your conversation about the American structure and this Dominionism and Supremacy is, in time we have talked about various holidays and such. Can you elaborate a little bit about how various holidays and what they are talked about publicly and what they and what their real meaning is?
So this day that I think we're thinking about this coming out is Martin Luther King Day, and they did something that caused so much anger. They brought in Martin Luther King, and they said, well, we can't give up. And they tried to set it up so you couldn't add another holiday because we already had too many for budgetary reasons. And so he goes, oh, why don't we make President's Day instead of Lincoln and Washington's birthday? When we were kids, we got a week's week back because of that. And they were merged into one day to create Martin Luther King Day, and it took ages before that was celebrated. But let me give you the one that changed Italians to whites. Italians were not white people. They were not. Neither were the Irish. Right? They were not white people. White people were still more WASP. But the numbers were necessary. In order to get to the next society, they had to put an end to it. Irish kind of just moved into the position of being politicians, to become, policemen. They took on those type of situations. And pretty soon you saw them in Chicago and New York and Boston. They kind of took it over and got their acclamation. Italians was not so easy. We had a lot of inventors in Italy. There was a lot of good things out of it. But they were still seen, and they would often use the word in reference, they would call them spics. That would go eventually to Mexicans. And I hate using that word. I'm not doing it to be dramatic, but that's, that sort of thing. But this idea of them, they were, kind of collaborated with it. So they brought Christopher Columbus out and saying, well, look, we helped discover America. And they gave permission, right? This man who gave us the future. And if you want to be honest, brought slavery to the Americas. Disease to Americas. It would be the worst thing that ever happened to them. But in order to bring the Italians into the more dominant white culture, to make them feel part of the, because they were Catholic and would be part of it, so that they could join these country clubs, because they were making money. They were making good money, right? In America, they were fine. They were getting there, and you can't let somebody who makes money outside of the league too far. And so they created Christopher Columbus Day.
Wow.
And the Christopher Columbus Day gave permission to the rest of the white culture to recognize that Italians are white too. So the Christopher Columbus Day is a supremacist holiday to show that Christopher Columbus and the Italians were white too. And so then Italian food got more popular. They were allowed to work in the industries. Their mob was able to take over the unions. I'm just kidding. No, kinda. But they were accepted part of the culture. If a white guy got caught on the other side of the mob, well, it's okay. That was okay. And they had their own, and even the idea for the white supremacist groups, the other gangs, they're going to, they're Italians, so they're white enough to deal with. But they're also protective of their own family, so they showed all those proper traits. That sort of thing.
Now, you mentioned it was the same for the Irish.
The Irish, St. Patrick's Day.
Okay.
St. Patrick's Day is another day that normalized. Well, they had already normalized in a lot of ways. we saw it in the Catholic Church. They were building things. The Irish took a lot of it was bootstrapping. And so the Italians do. But this idea of getting to that moment, that the idea of St. Patrick's Day, which is not an official holiday, but became a right to parades and started being more and more acceptable. And so you saw more of that type of activity into our culture. And we saw it in paganism. Paganism, Celtic and Irish culture is a very important part of it because fairy folks and all of that. So they were seen from being cheap, poor labor, and as they obtained money, and as they do it, they basically were able to take on it. And St. Patrick's Day, the parades, the beer drinking, everybody's Irish on that day. That statement there, everybody's Irish on St. Patrick's Day, normalized them into the white culture. So their muscle, their brawn, went from basically aristocratic descendants of England and Europe, holding slaves across America, now included Italians and included Irish and several of the other Northern European cultures. My grandfather was called white. He was from Sweden. He was the whitest man you probably wanted that. My great-grandfather. Two of the most non-racist people I know. They planted seeds in me that would I'm very careful. I'm so grateful to. But yeah, so then all of these cultures came in. So Martin Luther King Day, which is a day should be normalization. Think about this. Should be normalizing it. Has never been normalized. That's because it's not a supremacist holiday. It was supposed to dilute. The goal of Martin Luther King Day was to give the black community, the civil rights community, all these people who are fighting for rights, see, you're an American too. But those holidays were never about being an American. It was about being a white Christian American. A white Catholic American. Your local church. The beer drinking American that we would sit down and drink. That holiday did not change the way we saw our community. And that's a shame. But it is going to continue normalizing. See, the good news is that I was able to break this the best I can. And my children did an amazing job. They have, again, the millennials did a better job. And I'm hoping that continues. They didn't accept, but it's child abuse. It's a form of child abuse. I really wish people would see it more as child abuse. This lack of education, pure Christian teachings. In this day and age, it's child abuse. I will never call it anything else like that. It was torture. It was by constant speeches, using the fear of God, the fear of the enemy, fear, and then feeding it that you're special. And if you didn't agree with you being special or not being afraid, they made sure that you had pain. And that was the teaching method of kids. Fear, pride, pain. That's how they raise them. Are you any wondering why they have the ability to be so loyal? You're afraid not to be.
Well, as a friend, I apologize that this has ever happened to you. However, I do thank you for having the courage to share your story and to share your information.
Thank you. This is the first time I've actually mentioned this on tape. This is the first time I really talked about this. A few friends now, but I think it's the right time for this to come out. I think that now, as we head to the Parliament of World Religions, that next one, for me, a 30-year journey, I think people will have to, I think that I appreciate you giving me a forum to talk about it. And talking with me over the last couple of months about this. I've appreciated that this is the end of a longer conversation. So.
Well, thank you. And thank you all for attending our discussion. I am Father D, and we will see you soon.